Why Dan Hurley's honesty should scare all of college basketball. You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just like to take a quick moment to ask for a couple small favors. If you're enjoying the content wherever you listen, take a second and subscribe to the show. Also, if you have an audio device, as I'm sure all of you do, as I pull my cell phone out of my pocket, go ahead to the podcast app and download the podcast on Apple, Spotify. Our most successful form of audio version is Apple. I think it's 65%. I think Spotify, we get like 20%. And there's the other podcast forms that wherever you get them, download it, follow it. It really helps. Every follow, subscription, and download not only helps build our UConn community, but also generates more revenue for UConn NIL initiatives. We're giving 10% of our revenue to Bleeding Blue for Good. That's one of UConn's NIL initiatives. And also, we're donating 10% of all revenue to Husky Ticket Project, which is a fantastic outlet that I'm proud to partner with, that helps send kids to games, and it makes a real difference in underserved communities. So thank you for being a part of this journey and for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. There was 30,000 people at the rent this past weekend, so I hope some of you guys use the Game Time app there. But hope everyone had a great weekend. Not so much if you went to the football game, but that's a story for another day. Let's dive into today's program. In a recent talk at the Middlesex Chamber of Commerce, it's a breakfast that the coaches do, Dan Hurley gave an honest and direct assessment of his team as of mid-October. And when asked about how he feels about the team right now, Hurley said he likes the team, but doesn't love it yet. His response to a fan, if he loved his team, he said, just bluntly said, "Not right now." Momentarily, that quieted the room, according to a recent article by Joe Arruda in the Hartford Courant, a friend of the program. And before the tension gave way to laughter, with everyone recognizing Hurley's, preseason superstition of nervousness, what followed was cautious optimism. This optimism should scare his Big East opponents and the rest of college basketball. Dan Hurley isn't done, nor is he thinking of the NBA or his roster for next season, a la Bill Self. He's coming. That being said, Hurley stressed that, much like last year, the team's development will be a process. He reminded the audience that nobody expected last year's team to rise to the level it did. Dan loves to remind people that UConn was picked closer to finishing fourth than they were third in the Big East preseason poll. In fact, before I get into the rest of the show, I've been asked to do a few of these preseason polls, and I'm declining to do them because not only do I want to focus on UConn as a whole and not worried about who they're playing, but preseason polls are exactly what they are. It is a shot in the dark. So it underlines the fact of why Dan Hurley is so frustrated that there are anonymous coaching polls and doubts about whether the Huskies would even make the Final Four last year or this year. In a quote from him, "No one had any idea that we were going to play as high a level of basketball as we played," clearly intimating that they've done this before. So why would anyone question their ability to recreate not the same season, but a similar or same result? However, Hurley is also realistic. The team is dealing with a loss of some major players, 3 starters, and key bench contributors, which means they're still in kind of a rebuilding phase at this point in the season. But Hurley is confident in his staff's ability to adapt with this great quote: "We're not spooked by everything that we lost, because we lost so much the year before." And I think that is so key for when people talk about, well, I think Mark Titus had a segment that a few Twitter folks have kind of attached to, and talked about how it's like, well, UConn fans last year told us that they were going to be really good, and we didn't believe them. So maybe we need to start believing them that this is possible. Because when Hurley's talking about specific areas of concern, I agree with him. Why does he only like the team for now? I think his concern really revolves around the loss of key players and how the accountability of the players that they brought in to make that next leap, right? He knows it will take time for the new group to come together. And right now they haven't quite reached a level of cohesion, but who has? It's October 21st. I think the other aspect of this is how can UConn manage expectations for this season, given the slimmer margins Hurley mentioned at the breakfast event. I think that's a really interesting point too. For anybody that doesn't, I think everyone understands what that means, but a slimmer margin is UConn won games last year in the NCAA tournament by an average of 14 points per game. The year before, they did it by like 13.7. They don't have to be as dominant to win a national championship. I can guarantee you, if we went and looked at the most recent national champions, they blow out their first opponent, likely, right? If they're a top seed, then they probably have a somewhat scare 5 to 7 point, 10-point game against the 8 or 9 seed. Then in the Sweet 16, those games get tougher. You win maybe by 4 or 5 points. Then the Elite Eights are one possession. Final Four, one possession. Championship game, one possession. So it's really incredible that you kind of set this standard of when we get to the tournament, we blow everybody out, or at least we control the game. Because even if we're being completely honest, as much as I love the fact that we beat Alabama by 14 points, that Alabama game was, nip tuck for a while. Then UConn spurted and made an incredible run. And same with the St. Mary's game from 2023, where they were leading at some point in the second half, and then UConn just took over. So I think that's a big talking point about the margins being slimmer. But then again, I think the playing field has leveled a little bit, where UConn will probably come back down to earth a little bit. They're not going to. I doubt they're going to go 37-3. But I also don't think that UConn is going to be in this kind of rebuilding mode where they're, 20, going into the tournament, 20-10 or something like that. There is absolutely no sign of that. And I think Hurley understands that this season's team won't be as dominant, right? But the goal is still to compete for a championship. But it was likely going to require more of a methodical approach. And he emphasizes that he is making improvements that believes that by March, this team can hit its stride, just like last year's team did. I know that Dan Hurley has a burning desire to stick it to anyone that doesn't believe that they can even come close to doing it again. This season is going to be all about reminding the country that UConn has done is historic, and that they aren't satisfied with back-to-back. A three-peat would cement UConn as a program that UConn fans already know is a blue blood, a program that is already the best in the country and the best modern-day program in the history of the sport. We can all go back into history and talk through UCLA, teams under John Wooden, or Kentucky teams under Adolph Rupp, even Indiana teams under Bobby Knight. But in today's day and age, in the field of 68, UConn is the standard. And with Dan Hurley at the helm, they plan on doing it time and time again. So why not strive for everything, as Dan Hurley talks about? And wears that wristband and those shirts. What does UConn want? Everything. And they're coming for it. Coming up, key players Dan Hurley talked about and what's expected of each after this. Hey, Husky fans, let me talk to you about Z-Biotics, the world's first genetically engineered probiotic that helps you feel better the morning after a night of a few drinks. It was created by a PhD to tackle those rough mornings, and here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut, not dehydration. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme that breaks down that toxic byproduct so you wake up feeling your best. I could have definitely used Z-Biotics after watching the Yankees Game 5 clincher, because I was drinking some tequila, and at 43, it's not my friend. But maybe next time I'll be making Z-Biotics my first drink of the night and wake up feeling refreshed. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off your first order. And don't worry, Z-Biotics is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're not satisfied, you'll get a refund, no questions asked. That's zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege for 15% off. Go check it out. And you're back on Locked On UConn. Coming off that historic back-to-back championship, the UConn men are looking ahead. We are now 14 days away exactly from the official start of college basketball. UConn is 16 days away from their opening game against my poor alma mater, Sacred Heart. Those boys are in for quite a come get your ass whipping, boy. I think that's going to be an interesting game for them, but I hope they're competitive for their sake, but I doubt it. But Hurley gave some insight into the players he's counting on to step up this season, starting with fifth-year guard Hassan Diarra, describing Diarra as a UConn guy through and through. Hurley praised his toughness and leadership, especially in high-pressure situations. Diarra's role as last season's sixth man of the year in the Big East was critical, but this year Hurley is expecting even more from him. And if I have to say, when I watched the scrimmage, I think because this is pre the scrimmage, his comments at this breakfast dinner that I wanted to highlight today. What I loved about Diarra in the scrimmage was leadership. He had a nice drive to the hoop. They got a and one. He missed a couple threes. Not worried about his shooting. He's a capable shooter. But I think the leap that he's trying to make is probably the most difficult one for any of the players that are coming back. Because Alex is expected to take that leap to an All-American, which I think he's 100% capable. And I think Haas is definitely capable of being an All-Big East player. If you look at his numbers in that game, 4 points, 9 assists, I think he had 2 steals. So if he keeps his average closer to his points per game average to around 10 points, and he dishes, I don't think he's gonna have 9 assists every game, but if he's close to that, if he's close to 10 and 8, 10 and 9, that's an All-Big East. That's an All-Big East season. To almost have a double-double as a point guard in the Big East, I think that's the expectation. And he pointed out that Diarra is a few players in the team with the personality to lead during tense moments. And I think that that's 100% true. I think Haas is kind of like I said last year, when he comes in the game, even when we had Steph Castle, who looks fantastic for the Spurs right now, but even when Steph would go out and Haas would take his place, there was like a calm that went over me. It's like, all right, cool. Our senior, now our grad student, is on the floor, and he's going to lead this team. And no matter what happens, I feel comfortable. And I think that's something that Haas needs to be recognized as. And I think he's kind of that calming effect. And with so many young players, I think they're going to need it. Next, Hurley highlighted Samson Johnson. He's waited his turn. And while Johnson is a major offensive weapon, thanks to his athleticism as a rim runner, they're going to be looking to have him do more things. And it's going to be a challenge whether Johnson can step up defensively, which we saw some of the struggles against Rhode Island and some of their bigs, kind of filling the void left by Donovan Clingan. And Hurley admitted, we're betting heavy that he's going to be able to anchor the defense, but also suggested there could be a tactical adjustment to ensure that Johnson isn't exposed in certain defensive situations. I talked about this post scrimmage, which was this team is going to look different defensively. They don't have as Rob Douster called it, the Great Wall of Bristol to kind of deter people from coming inside. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to play really solid perimeter defense. And when you get beat off the dribble or get beat into penetration, Terrace and Samson are going to have to not foul all the time. They're going to have to put their hands up. If they get an opportunity to block a shot, they block it. But the reality is they have to play really solid defense, and the guards are going to have to crash the boards because we got beat heavily in the first half against Rhode Island on the offensive rebounding side. And in the second half, that changed. You saw Aidan Mahaney crashing the boards. You saw Solo crashing the boards. You saw Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross. So the effort needs to be there from the jump, not when they're kind of complacent in the first half. It's a scrimmage, so I will move on from there. But I think that's really important that he talked about, that there's going to be adjustments to ensure that Johnson isn't just alone on an island. If they do play a really good post presence, let's say like Zach Edey's gone, but if there's a player this year that emerges similarly to him and they don't want to double, that's different. But if it's a player that you know is decent, that you can kind of get some maybe some pressure on and double, I think that's kind of where we're going to see it, especially because with our wings and our guards, we have the speed to come down, rake at the ball, and then be able to recover without giving up too many 3-point shots. And of course, there's Alex Karaban. Hurley didn't hold back in his praise for the redshirt junior, saying This is my favorite quote from any article that I've ever seen written about this program. Our whole program changed when Alex entered the building. Do you know how much respect Dan Hurley has for Alex Karaban to say that? I'm going to say that again. Our whole program changed when Alex entered the building. I can't tell you enough how much that means to me as a fan, because when I watch the game, Alex Karaban is who I'm watching because of exactly the things that Dan loves: his work ethic, the leadership, how he's been able to be an absolute staple of this offense and defense from the jump even as a redshirt freshman. So he's been transformative for UConn. And this year, he's got his chance to play at an All-American level because he's going to be essentially the focal point of this offense in terms of how they lead. And I know there's going to be people in my YouTube comments that say, well, at UConn, they don't really focus on one player. That's true. But Alex Karaban averaged about 14 points a game last year, a little less than that. He needs to pump that up to about 18 points a game. God, it'd be great to have him at 20 and really kind of have a higher usage, because you can't always rely on all of the freshman, sophomore to kind of not bail you out, but he's the guy. He's the guy. The buck's going to stop with Alex. So I think Karaban might be able to claim, this is according to Dan Hurley, the greatest 3-year run of any player in 50 years, and maybe the greatest run of any player in the history of UConn. If Alex Karaban wins a third national championship and then goes to the pros, I think you have to automatically put him in the top 1, 2, or 3 of UConn's best players of all time. You just have to. That's my opinion. I think Alex is in the conversation for, one of the greatest players to ever play at UConn. But if you're at 3 in a row, I don't know. I don't know if you might have to put him at number 1, and I'm fine with that. I think, again, to recap some of the questions in this segment: Haas's leadership, how is it going to evolve this season? Why is it so crucial? I think he's going to be an all Big East player. And secondly, the defensive side of the ball with Samson Johnson being that anchor, also an anchor that doesn't foul. It doesn't mean that he's going to block 4 shots a game, but someone that you can trust. I think Samson also has some offensive versatility that Dan has talked about in terms of initiating offense. I think that's going to be fantastic. I think that's going to be key to the season. And then obviously Alex and his contributions as he ramps up his usage and potentially is the Big East Player of the Year and a first-team All-American. When we return, why Dan Hurley prefers a low-key first night, and my opinion on first night coming up after this. Hey, Husky fans, let me tell you about your old friends at Game Time. Game Time is all about stress-free ticket buying. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, theater events near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing and start enjoying. Ever had a situation where you plan to go to a game last minute? That's why Game Time is here. It makes it quick and easy. No more fumbling through emails. You have the app. Game Time offers Game Time guarantee, so you'll find tickets in the same section row for less. They'll also credit you 110% if you find a price that's cheaper. 100, so you actually make money if you can prove that they're not the best in the business. Snag tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. What's up, everybody? My impressions about first night. And first off, really enjoying this episode, clearly because we're talking about Dan Hurley and all of his passion and zest for this game of college basketball that we know and love. And it also makes me want to run through a brick wall at Monday morning as I'm putting this together, because his quotes, his attention to detail, all of that. And so that's why I think the first night is all about focusing on winning and not about throwing a party. And I know that he took, as Dan Hurley does, he does like to take shots at other programs, kind of like what's kind of the Twitter vernacular, like a subtweet or like a passive aggressive little shot where he doesn't like call anybody out by name. But, Providence had Zach Brown at the game doing a concert. Little John was at Kansas. So it's just one of those things where I'll get to Dan Hurley's comments, but it's those events for other programs are about flash, where he'd rather focus UConn's resources on what truly matters, winning championships. And he bluntly put, we put our resources towards winning championships here. I think the students would rather have a celebration in Gamble the night of the national championship than a musical act. I love it. Hurley's priority is clear, obviously. Keep the focus on the court where UConn can continue to build its legacy as a championship program. I thought some interesting comments about how he wanted to have a competitive one-on-one battle between prospective walk-ons for a spot on the team. And he said people would have been all over that, but no one bought into it. I, for one, Dan Hurley, would have been all over that. Give me a walk-on one-on-one battle, and whoever loses, you don't get to be on the team. That's fantastic. Come on, man. Like, I don't know why that didn't. Who turned that down? And Dan, if you need people to be on your staff that will 100%, get after ideas like this, I would raise my hand and work for free. Like, that is a phenomenal idea. So I also thought like they did it really well, which is, you did a little mini scrimmage. There wasn't any like corny, crappy slam dunk contest. I'll tell you this. I tweeted about it. I know this is more on the men's side of this show, but Ali Zabal, if you watched it on, is it Zybal or Zybal? I've heard it both of those ways. I'll get yelled at either way for pronouncing names wrong. I don't care. As long as the players aren't offended, you shouldn't be either. But anyway, what I would say is Ali, if you saw her shooting, holy cow. I think she made like 15, 17 in a row, something crazy like that. But yeah, I thought it was a really cool event. The dual programs, all of them came out. My favorite walkouts were, I loved Haas because he kind of just goes out there and poses. But then the mic drop for the men's side was Alex going out with his rings. And those rings are awesome, by the way. If anyone hasn't seen those, I think it's imperative that you go check those out because they're really cool. But also, if you notice, they got 3. They got the obviously the championship ring. I think they got a Big East title ring, and then they got an extra ring for back-to-back. So that was really cool. The other aspect of this is, and we'll cover it on the women's show, is I love the coaches just doing interviews, but you can tell it's like the last night that they can watch their team and not feel like they have to really get after them. It was a really cool, laid back to see Gino and Dan, both fierce competitors, both just absolute lightning rods for their team. Just kind of lay back and watch kind of what they put together. Thought it was really cool. So yeah, guys, that's all I have for today. The crux of this show was about talking about how Dan Hurley is not done. And he is 100% coming for everything and everyone that ever says anything negative about him. And I love that about him. It's not about revenge. It's not about being petty. It's about if you don't believe that I can do this, watch me. And be wary of people who tell you can't do things. Forget about sports, in life. And I'm not trying to be a preaching here, but do you know any people that told me that I was silly to even ask about a UConn show? And here we are. I do this every day, twice a day, and I love it. And I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to be here covering Dan Hurley and Gino Auriemma and all these fantastic student athletes. And I couldn't be happier. Just doing it every day. So this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked on, stay connected, keep those toughness meters rising. And as always, go Huskies.